The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty plains of New Mexico Territory, 1884. Sarah McKenna stood at her kitchen window, watching her husband Thomas mend the fence near their modest homestead. The adobe house they'd built with their own hands seemed to glow golden in the early light, a testament to 3 years of hard work and dreams of a future together. "Coffee's ready, Tom," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard where their small herd of cattle grazed peacefully. Thomas looked up and waved, his weathered face breaking into the familiar smile that had won her heart back in Kansas. At 32, he was a man of few words but steady hands, the kind who believed in building something lasting in this harsh but beautiful land. The sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Sarah's heart began to race as she counted the riders, 6 men, all armed, moving with the deliberate pace of those who owned whatever ground their horses touched. She recognized the lead rider immediately, Jake Morrison, a man whose reputation for violence preceded him into every town from Santa Fe to Tucson. "Sarah, get inside," Thomas called, his voice steady but urgent. He set down his tools and walked toward the house, his movements careful and measured, but it was too late. Morrison's gang had already surrounded their property, cutting off any escape routes. The outlaw leader, a tall man with cold gray eyes and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, dismounted with theatrical slowness. Well, Morrison drawled, his voice carrying the lazy confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "Thomas McKenna, heard you've been doing real well for yourself out here. What do you want, Morrison?" Thomas positioned himself between the outlaws and the house, his hand resting on the old Colt .45 at his hip. Morrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Want? Hell, I want a lot of things. Your cattle, for starters. Your land. Your house." His eyes found Sarah through the window, and his smile turned predatory. "Maybe even your pretty wife." "You'll get nothing from us," Thomas said, his voice firm despite the odds. "See, that's where you're wrong, farmer." Morrison's hand moved to his gun with practiced ease. "Out here, I take what I want. And right now, I want everything you got." The next few minutes unfolded like a nightmare Sarah would replay in her mind for months to come. Thomas drew his weapon, but Morrison was faster, much faster. The gunshot echoed across the valley like thunder, and Sarah watched in horror as her husband crumpled to the ground. "No," she screamed, bursting through the door, but Morrison's men grabbed her arms, holding her back as she struggled to reach. "Thomas, should have just walked away quiet-like," Morrison said, holstering his smoking gun. "Now you've made it personal." Sarah fell to her knees beside Thomas, cradling his head as blood soaked into the dry earth. His eyes found hers, and with his last breath, he whispered, "Run, Sarah, run," but there was nowhere to run. Morrison's men ransacked their home, taking everything of value, their small savings, Thomas's father's watch, even the silver locket her mother had given her. They drove off their cattle and horses, leaving Sarah with nothing but the clothes on her back and a grave to dig as the sun set that evening, painting the sky the color of blood. Sarah knelt beside the fresh mound of earth that held her husband. The Apache who'd been watching from the ridge half a mile away saw her shoulders shake with grief, heard her broken sobs carry on the desert wind. His name was Ayanna, which meant eternal blossom in his language, though the white settlers who feared him called him Ghost Walker for his ability to move unseen through the desert. At 28, he was a man caught between 2 worlds, cast out by some of his own people for his willingness to live peacefully near white settlements, yet never accepted by the settlers themselves that he'd seen the McKinnis many times over the past year, always from a distance. Unlike other whites, they'd never shot at him on sight or tried to drive him away. Once, Thomas had even left water and jerky near the old oak tree where Ayanna sometimes sheltered, a gesture of respect that had not gone unnoticed. Now, as darkness fell over the valley, Ayanna made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He would not let the woman suffer alone. 3 days had passed since the attack, and Sarah had barely eaten or slept. The isolation of her homestead, once a source of peace, now felt like a prison. Every sound made her jump. The wind through the cottonwoods, the scurry of desert creatures, the distant howl of coyotes. She was drawing water from the well, when she sensed someone watching her. Turning slowly, she saw him, an Apache warrior, sitting motionless on his horse about 50 yards away. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but something in his posture told her he meant no harm. He sat with his hands visible, making no move toward the rifle across his saddle. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the dusty yard. Sarah had heard the stories about Apache warriors, fierce fighters who could track a man across solid rock and disappear into the desert like smoke. But this man's dark eyes held something she hadn't expected: compassion. Slowly, he dismounted and walked toward her, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. He stopped about 10 feet away and spoke in accented but clear English. "Your husband was a good man," he said simply. "I am sorry for your loss." Sarah's grip tightened on the water bucket. You knew Thomas?" "I watched. From the hills. He never tried to drive me away. Left food sometimes, by the old tree." Ayanna gestured toward the oak. "Not many whites show such respect." "Why are you here?" Sarah asked, though her voice held curiosity rather than fear. "Morrison will come back," Ayanna said matter-of-factly. "Men like him always come back. They think you are weak now, alone. Easy prey." Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd been so consumed by grief that she hadn't considered the possibility of the outlaws returning. What do you think they want? Your land, your body, your death, eventually." Ayanna's honesty was brutal but necessary. "They cannot leave witnesses to their crimes." "Then I need to leave," Sarah said, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. This place held every memory of her life with Thomas. "Where would you go?" Ayanna asked. "You have no money, no horse, no family nearby. And Morrison's men know these trails better than most. They would find you." Sarah sank onto the porch steps, the weight of her situation crushing down on her. "Then what choice do I have?" "You could fight." She looked up at him, seeing determination in his weathered features. "I don't know how to fight men like Morrison. I'm just a farmer's wife." "You are more than that," Ayanna said, his voice firm. "I saw you with your husband. You worked beside him, shared his burdens. You have strength, you just need to find it. And you're offering to help me find it?" Sarah asked, still not quite believing this conversation was happening. "Morrison killed a good man. He will kill more before he is stopped. Someone must stand against him." Ayanna's jaw tightened. "My people have been fighting for our land for generations. I know what it means to defend what is yours." Sarah studied his face, seeing the weight of his own losses reflected there. "Why would you risk your life for someone you don't even know?" "Because your husband showed me kindness when others showed only hatred. Because every time good people do nothing, evil grows stronger. Because," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "because I know what it means to lose everything to men with guns and no conscience." That evening, as they sat by a small fire behind the house, Ayanna told Sarah about his own losses. His wife and infant daughter had died in a cavalry raid 5 years earlier, not because they were warriors, but because they were Apache. The grief in his voice was raw and familiar, a pain that transcended the boundaries of race and culture. "I lived for revenge for a long time," he admitted, staring into the flames. "Killed soldiers, burned supply wagons, became the ghost the white man feared. But revenge is a fire that consumes everything, including the one who carries it." "What changed?" Sarah asked softly. "I realized that living only for revenge meant my wife and daughter died for nothing. Their love, their laughter, their dreams, all of it reduced to fuel for my anger." He looked at her across the fire. "I decided to honor their memory by choosing when to fight and when to build. Thomas showed me that not all whites are my enemy. Now I choose to fight for something, not just against it." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for what you're suggesting." "Strength isn't about being fearless," Ayanna said. "It's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. Tomorrow, we start preparing. Morrison will be back within the week. I can feel it in the wind." As they planned through the night, Sarah began to understand that she was no longer alone. This Apache warrior, this man who had every reason to hate her people, was offering her something precious: hope. The next morning brought a harsh reality check. Sarah had imagined herself somehow transformed overnight into a fierce warrior, but Ayanna's training quickly revealed the gulf between determination and ability. "Hold the rifle like this," he instructed, adjusting her grip on Thomas's old Winchester. "It's not a snake. It won't bite you if you hold it firmly." Sarah's hands shook as she tried to aim at the tin cans Ayanna had lined up on the fence posts. The rifle felt impossibly heavy, and the kick when she fired sent her stumbling backward. "Pathetic," she muttered, rubbing her shoulder. "My wife couldn't hit a tree if she was standing next to it when I first taught her," Ayanna said with a slight smile. By the end, she could drop a running rabbit at 30 yards. Skill comes with practice, not wishes. Over the following days, Sarah learned more than just marksmanship. Ayanna taught her to read the land, to notice when birds suddenly went quiet, when dust patterns indicated approaching riders, when the very air seemed to hold its breath before violence erupted. "Your husband built well," Ayanna noted as they reinforced the house's defenses. "Adobe walls are thick, windows are small and high. With some modifications, this could be a real fortress." They worked together, boarding up unnecessary windows, creating firing ports, and stockpiling water and ammunition. Sarah's hands, soft from her relatively comfortable life, grew calloused and strong. More importantly, her mind grew sharp and focused. "Tell me about Morrison's men," she said one evening, as they planned their strategy. "6 of them, including Morrison," Ayanna replied, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "Morrison is the fastest gun, but he's arrogant. Makes him predictable. His lieutenant, Carlos Vega, is smart but cruel. He'll try to flush you out with fire or threats. The others are followers, dangerous but not thinking men." "What about you?" Sarah asked. "Morrison's gang thinks they're dealing with a helpless widow. They don't know about you." "That's our advantage," Ayanna nodded. "I can move through the desert like a shadow, strike from unexpected angles. But I cannot be everywhere at once. You must be able to defend yourself." Sarah's shooting improved dramatically. By the 4th day, she was hitting targets consistently at 50 yards. More importantly, she was learning to think tactically, to anticipate where enemies might approach from, to use the terrain to her advantage. "You're thinking like a warrior now," Ayanna observed as Sarah outlined her plan for defending the house's weak points. "I'm thinking like a woman who refuses to be a victim," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference." That night, as they sat cleaning weapons by lamplight, Sarah voiced the question that had been haunting her. "What happens after? If we survive this, what then?" Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent so long living day to day, I haven't thought much about tomorrow." "You could stay," Sarah said quietly. "Help me rebuild. This land is big enough for both of us." A white woman and an Apache warrior as partners. Ayanna shook his head. The townspeople would never accept it. They'd come for both of us eventually. "Then, we make them accept it," Sarah said with fierce determination. "I'm tired of living in fear of what other people think. I'm tired of letting hatred and prejudice decide who I can trust, who I can call friend." Ayanna looked at her with something approaching admiration. "You have changed, Sarah McKenna. When I first saw you, you were broken. Now you are becoming something new, something stronger." "I had a good teacher," she replied, "and I discovered that sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to live fully." On the morning of the 6th day, Ayanna's prediction proved accurate. Dust clouds on the horizon announced the return of Morrison's gang. Sarah felt her heart rate spike, but her hands remained steady as she checked her weapons one final time. "Remember," Ayanna said as he prepared to take his position in the hills overlooking the homestead, "they expect you to be cowering inside, helpless and afraid. Use their expectations against them." "Ayanna," Sarah called as he moved toward the door. "Thank you for everything." He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Thank you for reminding me that some things are worth fighting for." As he disappeared into the landscape like smoke, Sarah took her position at the reinforced window. In the distance, she could see Morrison's gang approaching, their horses kicking up dust devils in the morning heat. Her mouth was dry, her palms sweaty, but her resolve was steel. She thought of Thomas, of the dreams they'd shared, of the life Morrison had stolen from them. She thought of Ayanna's losses, of the courage it had taken for him to choose hope over revenge. And she thought of her own transformation, from helpless victim to determined defender. The outlaws were close enough now that she could see Morrison's scarred face, could hear his cruel laughter carrying on the wind. But Sarah McKenna was no longer the woman they'd terrorized a week ago. She was something new, something forged in the fire of loss and tempered by the strength of unlikely friendship. The final confrontation was about to begin. Morrison's gang rode into the yard with the swagger of men who'd never faced real resistance. Jake Morrison himself looked almost bored as he surveyed the seemingly quiet homestead, his scarred face wearing the expression of a man collecting on a debt. "Sarah McKenna," he called out, his voice echoing off the adobe walls. "Time to settle accounts, widow woman." From her position behind the reinforced window, Sarah watched the 6 men spread out across her property. They moved with practiced efficiency, but Ayanna had been right. They were overconfident, expecting to find a broken woman hiding in the dark. "I know you're in there, Sarah," Morrison continued, dismounting near the spot where Thomas had died. "We can do this easy, or we can do it hard. But either way, you're coming with us." Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger of her Winchester. At this range, she could probably take Morrison down with her first shot. But Ayanna had taught her to be patient, to let her enemies reveal their weaknesses before striking. "Carlos, check the barn," Morrison ordered. "Jimbo, you and Pete circle around back. Rest of you, watch for any movement." As the men moved into position, Sarah felt a cold calm settle over her. This was it, the moment that would determine whether she lived as a free woman or died as a victim. She thought of Thomas, of the life they'd built together, of the dreams Morrison had shattered with his callous greed. The first sign of trouble came when Pete, one of Morrison's men, suddenly stiffened near the chicken coop. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, but Ayanna's arrow took him in the throat, dropping him silently to the ground. "Pete," Morrison called, "what's your status?" When no answer came, the outlaw leader's demeanor shifted from casual confidence to alert wariness. "Something's wrong," he muttered, drawing his gun. "Boys, we got company." Carlos emerged from the barn, his face pale. "Boss, Pete's dead. Arrow through the neck. We got Apache out here." "Apache?" Morrison's eyes narrowed as he scanned the hills. "Well, that changes things. Means the widow's got herself a guardian angel." Sarah chose that moment to make her presence known. She fired through the window, her bullet splintering the wood near Morrison's feet. The outlaw leader dove for cover, behind the water trough, cursing loudly. "There's your answer, Morrison," Sarah called out, her voice strong and clear. "I'm not hiding anymore." "You little bitch," Morrison snarled. "You think one Apache and a lucky shot make you dangerous? I've killed dozens of your kind." "Then you should know," Sarah replied, working the lever of her rifle, "that we don't die easy." The battle erupted in earnest. Morrison's men took cover behind whatever they could find: the barn, the fence, their horses. But Sarah and Ayanna had prepared for this moment, and their preparations showed. Sarah's rifle spoke again, and Jimbo yelped as her bullet creased his shoulder. From somewhere in the hills, Ayanna's arrows found their marks with deadly precision. Another of Morrison's men crumpled, clutching his chest. "Damn it," Morrison shouted to his remaining men. "Rush the house. Don't give them time to reload." Carlos and the surviving gunman charged across the open ground toward the house. Sarah met them with controlled fire, her weeks of training evident in every shot. Carlos stumbled and fell, clutching his leg, while the other man made it to the side of the house only to find himself facing Sarah's Colt .45 through a firing port. "Drop your weapon," Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The man's hand trembled as he looked into her eyes. What he saw there, not fear, but cold determination, made his choice for him. His gun clattered to the ground. "Smart man," Sarah said. "Now lie down and don't move." Outside, Morrison found himself facing a situation he'd never encountered before, a fight he might actually lose. Of his original gang, only he and the wounded Carlos remained combat effective, and their Apache enemy was still out there somewhere, unseen but deadly. "This isn't over, widow," Morrison called out, his voice cracking with rage and frustration. "I'll burn you out. I'll..." His words were cut short as Ayanna appeared like a phantom, rising from the tall grass where he'd been, crawling closer to the house. The Apache warrior's rifle was aimed directly at Morrison's heart. "It is over," Ayanna said simply. "Your men are dead or surrendered. You are alone." Morrison's hand moved toward his gun, but Ayanna's voice stopped him cold. "I am hoping you will. Try," the Apache said, his tone carrying the weight of 5 years of suppressed rage. "Give me a reason to send you to meet the innocent people you have killed." For the first time in years, Jake Morrison felt genuine fear. He'd built his reputation on intimidating farmers and shopkeepers, people who'd never fought back. But this Apache warrior had the look of a man who'd seen death up close and made peace with it. "You're making a mistake, Apache," Morrison said, trying to reclaim his swagger. "I got friends in high places. Kill me, and they'll come for both of you." "Let them come," Sarah said, stepping out of the house with her rifle trained on Morrison. "I'm tired of running from bullies." Morrison looked between the two of them, the Apache warrior and the widow who'd refused to break, and saw his own doom reflected in their eyes. These weren't victims anymore. They were something far more dangerous. People who'd found something worth fighting for. "You can't kill me in cold blood," Morrison said desperately. "It ain't legal." "You're right," Sarah said, surprising everyone. Ayanna stepped back. The Apache warrior looked at her questioningly, but did as she asked. Morrison's hand moved toward his gun, hope flickering in his eyes. "Draw," Sarah said simply. To Morrison's face lit up with vicious joy. A showdown, this was. Territory, he understood. His hand flashed toward his weapon, the same lightning-fast draw that had killed Thomas and countless others. But Sarah was ready. Her Colt cleared leather a fraction of a second after Morrison's. But her shot was true. The outlaw leader's bullet went wide, kicking up dust near her feet. Sarah's bullet found its mark, and Jake Morrison crumpled to the ground, his reign of terror finally ended. In the silence that followed, Sarah stood over the man who'd taken everything from her. She felt no joy in his death, only a profound sense of justice served. "Is it over?" she asked Ayanna, who was checking on the wounded. "Carlos." "For now," he replied. "But word will spread. Others will know that this land is defended." As they dealt with the aftermath, tending to the wounded, burying the dead, securing the prisoners, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. The homestead was damaged but intact. The threat was ended, and she was no longer alone. "What now?" she asked Ayanna as they stood together on the weathered wooden porch that evening, the familiar creak of the old boards beneath their feet a comforting sound after all the chaos they had endured. The air was warm and still, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers from the valley below. They watched in contemplative silence as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of amber and crimson, casting long shadows across the valley where so much blood had been spilled, where so many lives had been forever altered, where the very fabric of their existence had been torn apart and slowly, painstakingly rewoven into something neither of them could have imagined. "Now we build," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of certainty that had sustained him through the darkest moments of their shared ordeal. His weathered hands rested on the porch railing, fingers tracing the wood grain as if memorizing its texture. "We make this place strong, not just the buildings and the fences, but the spirit of it. We prove that people can choose to stand together, instead of apart, that they can look beyond the color of skin or the language of their ancestors to see the strength that comes from unity." Sarah nodded slowly, feeling the profound truth of his words resonating deep in her bones, in the very marrow of her being. The conviction in his voice stirred something within her that had been dormant since Thomas's death, hope for a future she had never dared to envision. Together, then, partners in this endeavor, in this dream of something better than what came before. "Partners," Ayanna agreed, the word carrying the weight of a sacred vow between them. His dark eyes met hers, and in that moment, they both understood that this partnership would extend far beyond the immediate challenges they faced. It was a commitment to building something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. As the first stars began to appear like scattered diamonds in the darkening velvet sky, Sarah McKenna looked out over the vast expanse of land that stretched before them, the land she and Thomas had loved with every fiber of their being. The land they had dreamed of taming and nurturing. The land she had fought so desperately to defend against those who would destroy everything she held dear. The rolling hills and distant mountains were now bathed in the ethereal glow of twilight, transforming the familiar landscape into something almost magical. She thought of her husband, of his gentle hands and his infectious laughter, of the dreams they had shared during those precious early years of their marriage when the future had seemed bright and boundless. She remembered the way he used to stand on this very porch, his arm around her waist, pointing out where they would plant the orchard, where they would build the barn, where their children would someday play. Those dreams had died with him, buried in the cold ground alongside his broken body. But now, standing here beside Ayana, she found herself nurturing new dreams, different dreams she was building with this unlikely ally who had become so much more than she had ever thought possible. These new visions of the future were not replacements for what she had lost, but rather an evolution, a transformation of hope itself. The Outlaws had taken everything from her: her beloved husband, her sense of security, her innocence about the cruelty that men could inflict upon one another. They had stripped away her naive faith in the inherent goodness of the world, leaving her raw and wounded and fundamentally changed. But in their brutal attempt to break her spirit, to reduce her to nothing more than a victim of their violence, they had inadvertently forged something far stronger than what had existed before. They had created a partnership that transcended the seemingly insurmountable boundaries of race and culture, a bond that had been forged in the white-hot fire of shared loss and mutual survival, then tempered by the gradual growth of respect, understanding, and something approaching kinship. What had begun as a desperate alliance born of necessity had evolved into something profound and unbreakable. The story of the widow and the Apache would indeed be told for generations to come, passed down through whispered conversations around dying campfires, shared in hushed reverence in trading posts and frontier settlements, carried on the lips of travelers who had witnessed something extraordinary unfold in the vast expanse of the untamed West. It would not be remembered as a simple tale of revenge and retribution, nor would it be reduced to the crude simplifications that so often plague the retelling of such encounters between worlds that seemed destined never to understand one another. Instead, their story would endure as living proof, tangible and undeniable evidence carved into the very fabric of human memory, that sometimes the most powerful and transformative force in the world, the one thing capable of bridging seemingly insurmountable divides and healing wounds that have festered for generations, is nothing more and nothing less than two people, two souls from vastly different worlds, making the conscious and deliberate decision to stand together against the encroaching darkness that threatens to consume everything in its path, to face whatever trials and tribulations may come their way with united hearts that beat as one, an unwavering resolve that cannot be shaken by fear or doubt or the cruel judgments of those who would never understand the depth of what they had found in one another. Their bond had transcended the boundaries of race and culture, of past grievances and ancestral hatreds, becoming something that existed beyond the petty divisions that had torn apart so many others who might have found similar connection if only they had possessed the courage to look beyond the surface of their differences. In choosing each other, in choosing hope over hatred and understanding over vengeance, they had written a new chapter in the ongoing story of human resilience and redemption, proving that even in the harshest and most unforgiving of landscapes, both physical and emotional, love could take root and flourish, creating something beautiful and lasting from the barren soil of loss and grief that lie in the distance, stretching across the endless expanse of desert floor where the purple shadows of evening were beginning to gather like old friends returning home. A coyote raised its voice in the ancient song of the wilderness, that primal, haunting melody that had echoed across these lands since time immemorial, carrying within its notes the wisdom of countless generations and the promise of countless more to come. The sound that had once seemed so achingly lonely and mournful to Sarah's ears, a painful reminder of her own isolation and the vast emptiness that had threatened to swallow her whole in the wake of her devastating loss, no longer carried that crushing weight of solitude and despair. Instead, as the wild, haunting call drifted across the cooling evening air, its sound seemed to stretch endlessly across the vast expanse of open land, weaving like smoke between the scattered sagebrush, brushing softly against the brittle grasses and curling around the ancient, weathered stone formations that rose from the earth like the bones of time itself, jagged, timeless, and immovably wise. These natural monuments stood like silent sentinels. In the fading light, bathed in amber and violet hues from the setting sun, as if bearing witness to something sacred and eternal. The cry did not sound like a cry of sorrow, nor of fear. It was something older, deeper. It sounded like freedom itself, wild, untamed, untouched by civilization's heavy hand. It carried with it the very soul of the land, fierce, resilient, and open. It spoke in a language not taught but remembered, ancient and instinctual, resonating not in the mind but in the marrow. In its raw cadence lived the echo of 1,000 forgotten stories and the promise of countless more yet to unfold. It was a sound that did not merely travel across the land, it became part of it. It swept across dry riverbeds and cracked earth, gliding effortlessly over cliffs and into valleys where shadows grew long and deep. It stirred the air like a prayer carried upward on the wind, a benediction not of words, but of presence, a living voice of nature itself, reminding all who heard it that they belonged to something greater, something vast and beautiful and alive. Within its echo lay the unmistakable whisper of possibility, of adventures not yet taken, of footsteps waiting to be pressed into untrodden soil, of bonds not yet formed but destined by fate. It carried with it the energy of change, of healing, an invisible current that moved not just through space, but through soul. It was as if the land itself was exhaling after a long-held breath, inviting in something new. A beginning. That cry, piercing, melodic, and reverent, spoke to the very hearts of those who heard it. For Sarah and her Apache companion, it became more than just sound. It became an affirmation. It told them without words that the journey they had chosen, the fragile trust they had dared to forge across the deep ravines of pain, memory, and difference, was not only worth it, it was sacred. Neither of them could yet fully understand the path ahead, nor the ways in which their connection would ripple outward, touching lives they had never met, changing the landscape of hearts too, long closed by fear or tradition. But they didn't need to understand. What they shared in that moment was something purer than understanding. Faith. Faith in the land, in each other, and in the quiet miracle that occurs when two people choose not to fear what is different, but to honor what is shared. Faith in the possibility of healing. Faith in the power of listening. And faith in the truth that sometimes, all it takes to change the course of everything is one moment. One cry in the evening air, one shared look beneath the stars, one step taken not alone, but together. And so, as the final note of the call faded into the twilight, its echo lingered, carried on the wind like a sacred thread, binding past to present, sorrow to hope, and two lives to the vast, waiting future that stretched out before them, limitless and full of light.